Hello, I'm Daniela. Today's video is a little bit different because we're going to make functional artwork. Today's video is about making actual fabric postcards, the kind that you can bring to the post office and mail. So they're actually a functional piece of art that will go from one person to another if you want to send them that way. Now I have a video showing a faux fabric postcard, and the idea is it resembled a card. And you can actually take those techniques to use them to make your real fabric postcards today. There are just some little specifications that you need to know to make this functional artwork actually work. Now, I was so fortunate that I was able to rely on the help of Nancy Lowe. She's a wonderful textile artist. I'll link her below because you'll want to take a look at her work. It's fabulous. She makes fabric postcards, and she doesn't just make one or two, she's made hundreds. She's a quilter, and she's transformed her art into making these miniature postcard size pieces of art, and they are fabulous. Each one is more beautiful than the next. She typically uses machine stitching, but she also does some slow stitching techniques with her cards as well. She was so helpful to give me some guidelines that she uses and she follows to make her postcards, and she was so generous. She answered my emails, she answered my questions. I can't say enough good things about her, and I want to send a big thank you to Nancy Lowe. I hope you'll take a look at her work and send her some positive comments as well. She is fantastic. In today's video, I'm going to show how to make that fabric postcard functional, whether you want to slow stitch it by hand, or machine stitch it. Basically, you'll make the front of it, the exciting part of a postcard, however you like. You can machine stitch it or hand sew it, slow stitch it. You can add embellishments. Anything goes as long as you meet the post office's requirements. Now, if you want to send your postcard in the mail, either in a clear sleeve or just the postcard on itself, you'll have to be very strict with the requirements. If you don't mind sticking your postcard inside an envelope or mailing it in a box or some padded envelope or something of that nature, well, then anything goes. But to mail it so that you can actually see the postcard, not tucking it inside a box or an envelope, you'll have to follow some of these guidelines. I've included the link to the downloadable file so you can print out the back of that postcard. You can attach it to fabric or to paper or cardstock. And then using a fusible adhesive, you'd attach it to your postcard. And this makes it kind of postal ready. I'll include that link below. So I can't wait to show you the techniques. Let's get started.
So in a previous video, which I'll link below, I showed you how to make a faux fabric postcard. The idea was it resembled a postcard, similar size, similar shape, but it wasn't to regulation. To make it to regulation so that you can actually use it as a postcard, I'll show you what you need to do. And there are a lot more steps than just creating the beautiful face of your card. The first thing you need to do is find out what your regulations are in terms of size for your postcard for your country that you're sending it in. In the United States, and those are the specifications that I'll be using, it's 6 by 4.5 inches, and they're very strict about that. You can also only go as far as a 1/4 inch wide. So that does give us some opportunity to add some elements to our piece. Shipping it, you have some options as well, and we'll go over those later on. But let's start with the most basic, and that's creating the front of our card. So knowing that it has to be a maximum of 6 by 4.25 inches. You want to go through your stash if you're using an existing piece, and if you're creating one for this purpose, I'll show you what to do there as well. So taking some existing fabric pieces that I have, particularly the ones that I thought resembled a postcard, I have a template here that's just 4 by 6 inches. It's a little piece of cardboard just left over from an artist pad. I also decided to make a real template. So I took a piece of 5 by 7, and this is like oak tag or poster board, just something with a little bit of heft to it, but not so much heft that cutting it out would be problematic for me. And I have a piece of 5 by 7, and I cut out 4 by 6 inside. Now 4 by 6 gives me a lot of leeway because I do have The 6 I'm pretty strict about, but the 4 I have another 1/4 inch to play with. So if I go through some of my existing postcards, well, clearly I would have to cut them down, particularly this size, and I don't want to do that. So this one isn't going to be an option for me. So I'll set that aside. Now this one fits within the 4x6. It's a little bit larger. If I hold it here, it's not quite 5 inches. So I would just use a ruler to find out. And it's a little wider than 4 1/4 inches. So this one isn't a candidate unless I want to do some surgery on it and cut it down to size. I have a smaller one here, and this fits well in my 4x6. So I could turn this and transform this into an actual fabric postcard. So that's an option. Set that aside. I also have some pieces that I worked on in previous videos, and I could just use my little guide to see. And this is an option as well. I would just cut out the pieces on the side. Now I also have some other samples that I created that I wanted to show you that I slow stitched. I created this little piece. I made it much larger than a 5x7, but I intended the area that I'm going to use as my actual fabric postcard to fit within that 4x6 frame. So this is an option, this black one. I also created this piece. And again, I just want to make sure it fits in, and my button and completed postcard is not larger than 1/4 inch. I also completed a much larger piece that I really liked. This one I used a machine to sew the back of it. I slow stitched a little accent over here, and now I could cut it down to size. I don't want to cut it down to size though, because I do like this panel, so I'll use this in future work. But I just wanted to give you an option of what you can do and how you could figure this out. Now I completed an actual fabric postcard. I did kind of a very loose satin stitch on the edge just to hold it down. I used a machine to stitch these pieces, and then I have a little backing that I adhered. Now I wanted to go through the steps with you to show you how to make this a completed postcard. And as you can see, it fits mostly inside my piece, so I know it's going to fit beautifully and meet those requirements for mailing. Now you can mail it just like this. It will get perhaps grungy or dirty. You have to bring it to the counter and have it hand stamped. And because of that, it requires a special stamp, a non-machinable surcharge on that stamp. So be sure to bring your card to the counter to meet those guidelines. You'd write your address and your greeting and put your stamp on. Now you could mail it this way, but with all this work, I wouldn't want to do that. So what I like to do is get a clear sleeve. I could fill out the postcard, put on my stamp at the counter, and then feed this in to my protective sleeve. Fits very snug because it is 4x6. And then I would just peel this area, seal it over, and then hand it over to the postmaster or postmistress and send it off. Before I send it off, I like to just snap a photo, just so I have a record of it in case it gets lost or damaged, whatnot. So that's one option. If you don't want to write on the postcard, and Nancy Lowe, who is the master of making these beautiful fabric postcards, says that sometimes people like to use them, so she won't write on them and she'll let the receiver of the gift use it. She'll just take a label, fill it out, and then put it here with the appropriate address. I think that's a wonderful idea. Just a little tip for you as well. You go through the same procedures, seal your envelope, bring it to the counter, have it hand stamped, and mail it off. I think that's a great technique. So let's get started going through the process of creating an actual usable and functional fabric postcard. So to start your fabric postcard, you want to create the front. You can do that either slow stitching, like I've done. You can use little elements if you'd like, or you can machine stitch it. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to show this on a blank piece of fabric here because it's the same technique. You want to make sure that your front of your card, the one with your greeting if you're going to use a greeting, but the part that isn't where you write your message or your sender address, you want to make sure it's the appropriate size. So I use my template here, and the outside is 5 by 7, and that's the minimum you want for the outside of your template. And then the inside is 4 by 6. So I'm using a heat erasable pen, a Frixion pen here, and I like to just jot down the inside here, particularly for my slow stitching. This might not be as relevant for machine stitching because with slow stitching, you don't really want to be cutting up the threads you've sewn. So I would do any slow stitching onto this little area here. So after I embellish this fabric however I want, either machine stitching, hand stitching, embroidery, anything of that nature, I can start to trim it down. I'm going to use this piece and skip ahead to the next step. I have lots of videos showing different techniques that you can use to make the front of your fabric postcard, and you can use whatever methods you like. So from here, I like to just press it just to make it a nice surface to work with, and you're going to need your iron for this technique. From here, as you can see, it's just the fabric with the slow stitching. So I need from here to give it a little body and to make that backing stay on. So to give it body, I have a piece of, this is fusible fleece. You can just use any type of batting and you can stitch it on if you like. I just think the iron-on is so easy. If you don't have fusible fleece, you can, and you just have like a heat bond, a little fusible adhesive, you could go through the additional steps of putting the adhesive on and then putting your batting on. So I'm just going to make sure that my batting covers the entire area that I want it to cover. And then I'm going to take my iron and press it down. So this will take a little while. I want to make sure I get a nice adhesion here between my batting layer, my fusible polar fleece, and my front of the postcard. Now at this point, my batting is attached pretty securely. If I was going to machine quilt it or hand quilt it, I would do that. I'm not going to do that with this piece. I have my stitching the way I want it. Now for the backing, I have a template you can download. I'll include that link in the information notes for the class. I have just a standard one. It's 4 by 6, so keep that in mind if you want your backing to be a different size. And I have another one here that has a little more interest, just a little background. You can print this out onto cardstock or even paper. Nancy's tip is to use the 60-pound cardstock if you're printing it out onto cardstock. I did have success printing it onto paper, but cardstock would be definitely more durable. Nancy suggests not using the heavier cardstock, the 115-pound, and use the 60-pound rather because it's easier to stitch through, and it still gives a lot of body. I have another alternative as well, and I just printed it with my inkjet printer onto some fabric. I purchased these little sheets. They're about 5 or 10 in a package. And you just feed it through your printer as if it was paper, and I have a video on that as well. And now I can just cut this out and use it. So I'm going to cut this interesting one out. You could do that with paper or the cardstock version, but I want to use the one here that's cut onto fabric. So if you're using the printed fabric, you want to just remove that paper backing that's on it. So I just fold it to the side here and then pull it apart. Now the fabric itself is not sticky or tacky, so it needs something just like regular paper to adhere it to the back. At this point you have a couple of options. I like to use this Heat and Bond. It's another fusible adhesive. So I just cut this to size. And I want to attach it here to the back of my fabric. Now because I used fabric for the actual backing, I could attach it to this just as easily, but I'm going to get in the habit of attaching it to my postcard. Before you attach it though, you want to consider what you want to do for the edges. Do you want to trim this down now? Do you want to fold it over? I'm just going to trim it down. I'm not going to fold it over, and I'm going to follow this line. If I trim it down now, it just makes it a little neater. However, if you're going to use a machine to zigzag stitch, which is what Nancy does, you wouldn't trim it down now. So now I have my backing and my fabric here. Because I trimmed it down ahead of time, it doesn't match up perfectly. So I could trim it down further, which is what I'm going to do, but first I want to attach it with using this fusible web. So I'll match this up and cut this out. Again, the fusible web attaches just by the rough edge, going right up against the piece you're going to attach it to, and holding the iron over it on the setting of the fabric that you're pressing it to. So once I have that iron down and it cools, it takes a few minutes, I can remove that paper backing. Again, I just fold it over, trying to create a little pocket to get my nail in. And I can pull that off. And now I don't know if you can see in the camera, but the adhesive is now on the back of this fabric, and it's very shiny. So now I want to take my backing and place it right on my fabric. Because I made the little mistake of trimming it too soon, I now have to just play around making sure that I get it appropriately on so that when I make my final cut, it will be fine. I'm going to come back with that paper, again shiny side down, and use that so that I don't get that adhesive on my iron. And now I just iron it again to make that nice connection. So now I have the front of my card and the back of my card. It's cooled down, and now I just want to trim along the edge here. And again, if you waited to trim it, you would just trim it the same way. I'm just trimming it now. So there I have my front card, the front of my card, and the back of my card. Technically, you could stop here with that raw edge. Nancy Lowe will take her machine out and make a zigzag stitch with invisible thread or matching thread around the edge. I'm just going to do a running stitch all the way around, just to really secure the fabrics together. So I'll start at the edge here. So I'm going to bring my needle down one of my elements just to hide the knot. I can trim that right off. And I'll just come over here and start a running stitch just around the edge of my piece. So now I stitched around the edge, and that's what it looks like on the back. And now my postcard is ready to be put in its clear envelope and brought to the post office to mail. And I think it's quite charming. I wanted to show you Nancy's method as well, just very quickly. I think this method will work for a lot of you, particularly if you're machine stitching or even hand stitching. So instead of trimming everything down, and this is just the postcard backing on the fabric that I printed out, but you could easily use the paper. But as you can see, there's a little bit of a border around it. So I have my fabric postcard, using whatever method you want. I happen to slow stitch it. I'm putting my adhesive backing and attaching that to the back of the postcard. So then I would remove that backing, and then line up the back of the postcard to the front. And if it matters to you, you just figure out the way you want it to go. Then I'll attach that down with some heat. So then after the adhesive dried and was cool, I would stitch around the edge. And from there, after I have my stitching done, I would keep it very close to the edge. I would just very carefully trim around it. Now for this piece, I'd have to make sure anything that came up was adhered down securely. Trim all those edges and I'd be ready to go. Now I wanted to show you the 3 methods for sending those postcards. So there are 3 methods for sending these actual functional postcards. I showed you the clear bag already. And again, you have to meet all the requirements with the size, the weight, nothing sticking up. Now they'll purchase the extra postage stamp to send it. You can bring it to the counter again, meeting all the requirements. Have it hand stamped and not put it in a sleeve. And that's up to you. A little risky if you ask me. Or you can just add it to a regular envelope. You stick it inside the envelope just like it was a letter. You can even tuck it inside a letter. And then it uses standard postage stamp. You don't have to go to the counter for this method. So you do have some options.
So that's the way I make a fabric postcard. I want to send a very big thank you to Nancy Lowe again. She is fantastic and I can't say enough good things about her. I'll include her link below and I encourage you to go look at some of her beautiful work. Have you made fabric postcards? If you have, please in the comments tell me how your process differed from the one I showed here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.